I need AI to survive now. There's no question. Like to keep up with the changing times, I need like 5 AI agents working for me 24/7 so I can get some sleep.
Yes, I get it. I absolutely get it. It just seems like, the funny thing about learning a little bit about how to build is it gets dangerous, right? Because now there's all kinds of stuff I want to build and I think I can build. And, I get all jazzed and, just like, oh man, I want to build this, I want to build that. And I find that I'm like, not ever sitting down and building something specifically because I'm spending too much time reading about stuff.
Yeah.
And which is good. I mean, I'm learning, but at some point the rubber has to hit the road. Like I finally sat down and made product requirements today for this thing I want to build, like just wrote out what the MVP requirements are and started working on it. So I feel good about that. That was only about 45 minutes ago. So haven't gotten very far yet.
Excellent. Well, you're taking the more code route. I'm taking the less code route
Right.
so far. And I'm struggling but enjoying what I'm building. And I now have 2 semi-functional bots. One is a sales assistant and one is a coach assistant or AI coach.
Okay.
But I'm versioning it. I'm just having something basic. I think a lot of times people get stuck on a massive vision and they don't know how to chunk it down into steps and they forget that it's a goddamn learning curve
Mm-hmm.
and they'll try and fail. My sister was a classic example in her early life. She'd start a new project and feel that she wasn't perfect at it and want to abandon the project almost immediately. And we've got to relearn that we just have to take it in phases. So I'm enjoying the phase that definitely making progress. Got ideas on the market that I'm going for, the co-marketing or the collaboration that I need to do. And yeah, all guns blazing at the same time as juggling everything else. I watched a podcast interview with, it wasn't a podcast, it was a panel. I don't know where it was. It was a strange YouTube channel that popped up, but it was Elon Musk. Is his name Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli
Yeah.
prime minister?
Yeah.
A guy from a co-founder of OpenAI, not
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I don't know the guy's name, and then some MIT professor type guy.
Okay.
They were basically aligned with AGI around 2029. And you've just shared an article with me before the call that's saying it's closer than you think. So I'm curious to read that article, but these guys on the panel were saying 2029. Elon Musk is projecting Neuralink by 2030.
Really?
So he's saying by 2030, which is what,
6 years? Yeah.
we will be able to stick little metal probes into our brain and he was describing the analogy he used was the growth of a tree, communication of trees. He says trees communicate, but from a human perspective, they communicate really, really, really slowly. They grow slowly. They spread their leaves. They got their roots and they're constantly like interacting with their ecosystem to shuttle nutrients. Like it's amazing what trees actually do. But he says our perception of how slow trees are is like how slow we are in the perception of AI. And so when we get to do the neural link and we're interfacing with this stuff, our brain is capable of very rapid, and it does very rapid computation. But that's a whole other kind of conversation of what cognitive experience are we going to have and how much are people going to accelerate in what they do in their productivity when they can interface with something like a neural link versus what normal humans do. And we're just so slow at typing and searching and one thing at a time. And AI is ready to just do everything at once. So it's a really interesting panel discussion, pretty scary. they were none of them. All of them are basically clueless about jobs in the future. They're basically saying, yes, we fundamentally need to restructure how economics works. Otherwise, people are not going to be able to survive because they got no no productive contribution to for what was the word they use? Like just subsistence or whatever. They're like, we're not going to have to do anything to live,
Yeah.
or we're like, what is our use and what are we going to want to do? It turned into a bit of a philosophical question. But what is the meaning? What meaning are we going to derive from life where we are superfluous and irrelevant to daily functioning? So interesting reflections, good panel discussion.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really great. It's the Neuralink thing is really crazy because we don't think that way, because this is what we're used to, and we type and we do things and like we talk to machines, but yeah, we don't realize how slow that really is. I mean, it's archaic. And I remember the first time I heard him talking about this, it really dawned on me like, wow, that would be just an incredible difference. And I think, of course, what it also does is it opens us up to being able to participate, excuse me, in the super intelligence, right? Like once you have a Neuralink, you can get connected to an LLM. That can be made available to you and integrated with your thoughts. In this article, Ray Kurzweil, who's pretty famous for his books about the singularity and his predictions over the last 40 or 50 years, which have been quite accurate for the most part. Um, but one of the things that comes up is this idea of, super intelligence being made available to the wealthy, and that, they'll have it and others won't, and it'll make, inequality even worse. But I don't think people realize that inequality is not going to really be an option that the way it's been now. I don't think wealth is going to have and occupy the same space that it does now, per se. Not in terms of like pure financial dollars, because when you think about it, wealth and money represent buying power. And if everything's basically free, or for all practical purposes, it is, or extremely cheap, then what does money do for you, really? Right? I mean, it could get you some custom items. I'm not saying it won't, but it won't have anywhere near the meaning that it does now. Um, so that's interesting, and I think that could be one of the barriers that keeps the elites from being willing to make the paradigm shift we're gonna need to a post-work society. They might not want to because it's actually gonna kinda diminish their net worth in a way. If they say, "Okay, the basics of life are now created by machines easily and abundantly, so they're gonna be made available to everybody at no cost." We're gonna, do some statistics about what the median home size is and whatnot, blah, 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 and everybody's going to get stuff, right? Well, at that point, they're kind of, giving themselves a haircut on their wealth. But if they're able to purchase these super advanced technologies ahead of everybody else, well, then that's a different story. Now you're creating a kind of a new type of inequality that could be um, almost impossible to overcome because, in a way, I think the thing about AGI and super intelligence that's a bit crazy is that once it starts, even if you can achieve it a month later, you're way behind because it's already ahead of you, right? It's already been evolving for 30 days, which the lifespan of a super intelligent, self replicating, self evolving thing is going to be like lifetimes. So even if you create an equivalent super intelligence, unless it somehow has like more power behind it or something, I just think the thing's gonna be like, it's like the first one's gonna be God, right? Like, everything else is just gonna be like a demigod, constantly in the process of catching up with it to some degree, it feels like. But to the point of this article, yeah, they're basically saying like 5 years, 20 20 27, 2028. Like, he mentions a few interesting things like that compute resource is a an issue. And he says the GPU market's growing at a compound annual rate of 33% annually from demand of AI, right? So supply chain bottlenecks are starting to alleviate. The chips right now, if you wanted to buy one of these top end GPUs, and they're $40,000 a piece. As a hardware geek, I know this stuff, but just to put it in perspective, one of these graphics cards at top of the line is $40,000. Those are the H100s from NVIDIA. But next year they're going to ship 4 times more. So the compute is going to start expanding very, very rapidly. The power that can power these language models, and we know that the equation so far that we know with deep learning, neural networks, large language models is that once you reach, I think it's 100 billion. I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure it's 100 billion parameters. So that's like pieces of information and whatnot. That's how you measure the data. When you train it with 100 billion parameters with these types of algorithms, that's when you start to get these emergent qualities. Like, famously, ChatGPT wasn't taught to code. They didn't do anything special to get it to code. There was nothing in the algorithms or anything. That just happened. That was an emergent property. And there's many others, but it doesn't happen to models that are under the parameter size, which is really interesting. So you can use the same algorithms and all that stuff and the same processes, but if it's under a certain amount of parameters, and it's a pretty hard cliff, is my understanding, you don't get these emergent properties. So the thinking is, as we go higher, right, we're going to get more of these emergent properties and ultimately AGI, right? Because, that's the thing. Now, whether or not that's exactly true, nobody knows, but it's really interesting. The compute's coming. The data, we're starting to reach an edge, but it's really interesting. I mean, it's quite crazy. But there's this other thing. If people want to check it out, it's called Metaculus. Yeah. So Calus forecast says strong AGI by 2030. So some super intelligence essentially. And I guess this is a pretty famous standard. This website, Metaculus. So that's a good one to follow.
On the wealth inequality thing, makes me think, like, I think definitions have to be clarified with the history of economics, politics, things like communism, socialism, capitalism, etc. Interestingly, Ayn Rand, who wrote the book Capitalism, An Unknown Ideal, she described this wealth inequality gap thing, and she used the analogy of kings and queens just 100 years ago who had all of the wealth through suppressive taxation. If you didn't pay, they'd throw you off your land and you'd starve and whatever. Imagine a kitchen of a king. They had a big pot, they had chefs, and they had some metal cutlery, but they didn't have blenders, whisks. They didn't have microwaves, not that I use a microwave, but they didn't have ovens, toasters. Your kitchen today is orders of magnitude better in functionality than what kings and queens had access to 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and what she was describing in her book, Ayn Rand, was that as technology advances, yes, for a time, the wealthy can access the newest technology. Like Apple Vision Pro is going to be $3,500. That's a year's salary for a lot of people in Latin America, for example. But no one could afford an iPhone when it first came, or very few could afford an iPhone. And now literally, I don't know what percentage it is, but most people have a smartphone today, and they have done for the past 10 years. So that's the suggestion. The suggestion is that the wealth gap can close by allowing this innovation to happen at the bleeding edge, and that gradually gets made available through efficiencies of scale as
Mhm,
technology becomes more affordable for all of the rest of us. We pay $10 a month for Netflix. Imagine the level of entertainment that you've got at your fingertips for $10 a month or whatever the subscription is. Um, so I think the elites will see wealth differently as well. The people who have had that difference of resource, the resource now is going to shift. It's going to be more humans values driven instead of just money so you can buy stuff while others cannot. It's going to be stuff like health. It's going to be stuff like
mm,
personal satisfaction. I've got this concept of productive bliss. I think we can achieve a relative bliss state, um, if our life was in order and we weren't stressed in the back of our mind by a bunch of niggling issues that come
mhm,
down to survivability. If we can satisfy those basic issues and then free ourselves to explore our interests, then again, the ultimate wealth is going to be our health, our sense of well being, and the productive bliss that we feel by living our day to day life. You've mentioned being interested in synthetic biology a number of times. Um, whatever that bridge is, the the reason to do that is not to restrict our cognitive or conscious or hormonal and emotional and human experience, but it's somehow to enhance it. We don't want to lose anything that's good if we're going to go towards this synthetic biology stuff.
mm.
We only want to enhance so that we feel better. Um, I think it might be that when we can do that and become complete cyborgs, we may choose not to because it might actually just be more satisfying being in a more simplistic experience. It makes me think of the Borg of Star Trek, right?
Mhm,
These cyborg people that are in constant communication across the quadrant. Um, and they're following orders and they've got this hive mind brain. Maybe there's something to be said of just the individuality and the quietude that comes from being in our own body, just as long as we don't have the stresses that are inherent in this old paradigm that we're hopefully replacing this decade. Um, so it's interesting to think of what will be elitism. I think it will be productive bliss. I think that will be the ultimate measure of elitism in the not too distant future.
yeah, I can see that. What was coming to mind as you were talking about the productive bliss concept was, you know, one of the major things that's in the back of all of our minds, at least according to psychology, at some level, is death, right? This we're subconsciously aware at all times that we can die, right? We have to be. We have to have an alert system that, keeps us out of trouble and blah blah blah, right? And it's not overt because comparatively to 100 years ago or more, we live a relatively safe existence, depending on where you live on Earth, but in many places. Um, but it's still there because it's possible. This also underlying thing that's kind of related to that is money, right? If you don't have the gift of being independently wealthy and set for life, there's always a little thing in there. There's always just a little bit of stress that says, "Am I going to have enough?" And so on and so forth. And so, if you could pull those two things away, right? Um, yeah, I mean, I think it could be a pretty amazing experience. It'd probably take a bit to settle into, and I'm imagining that you've got some other elements in there, like you need to be doing meaningful things and right, so on and so forth. But if you pull those constraints away, well, that's kind of precisely what you can do. Now you can pursue whatever does have the most meaning, whatever is the most compelling thing for you, at any given time. And I know that what comes to people's minds a lot is like, Well, we're just gonna end up with a world full of drug addicts, if nobody has, it's just like weird fear that, you know, only somebody who has no understanding of addiction could think that way because they're believing that addiction is a choice. And addiction starts off as a choice and then it becomes a compulsion and it becomes a disease condition. And anybody who is addicted does not want to be addicted. Believe me, given an option, if you could flip a switch, they would love to be unaddicted, right? So that's not going to be some conscious thing where people just go on and on, just deciding to do drugs until they die. Like, some people might start out that way and they might develop an addiction, but it's not going to be in any greater quantities than we have now. It's human beings don't like to do nothing. Like do the experiment and sit around for even an entire weekend and literally do nothing. Just watch TV. Do nothing. You'll be sick of it. It's just not the way we're wired. So I think we are in for an interesting thing. And I also think of the idea that in the instance of the sort of synthetic body, or even just the brain implants, I suppose, because they'll be capable of it. Imagine having an app on your phone where you could dial up your brain chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, right? You got templates that are from neuroscientists that say, "Hey, do you want to be in the what's this? The state that everybody likes is what is it? It's right, I'm bricking, but anyway, it's this sort of state where you're like mellow but super motivated and focused.
Flow
Um,
state,
huh?
flow, st-
Yeah,
flow
well,
state.
the flow state's like that, but anyway, hypomanic. That's what people talk a lot about. Like, this is a lot of like what the smart drugs and the sort of the tech people want to get into, which is like they're driven and they have that sense of mania and enthusiasm, but without the anxiety. So it's
Mhm.
hypomanic, right? It's a hypomanic state. But whatever, you could turn it to hypomanic, you could turn it to flow state, you could turn it to bliss, you could turn it to meaning, right? I mean, you could turn it to sadness if you wanted. I mean, but that's going to be possible. I promise you that'll be possible in the next 20 years. Like
Well, I
some
think
sort of way to do that.
it's that is a very, very interesting experiment, and no doubt it will be possible. Um, I think achievement is. I think we need to feel a sense of um, like something like self worth or self empowerment. Maybe we will discover that dialing up on the app is not as satisfying as actually
Mhm.
achieving something
Yep.
with your
Earn it.
day. So,
Mhm.
so there might be this thing like people. There's a movie. I wish I knew what movie it is, but I often remember this scene of a virtual reality experience. This guy's in a virtual reality thing, and he's strong and successful. I can't remember exactly what the interaction is, but then he comes back into the room, and you see him, and he's like in a dark little room with these concrete walls, and it's dirty, and he's sitting in
Mhm.
front of television, and he's like stuck on the little armchair, and he's overweight and unhealthy, and he looks like he hasn't taken a shower for a week, um and it's this contrast. And I think that's one of the most interesting social experiments that we are going to see play out. We are going to have people that plug themselves in and their body degrades and their mind
Mhm.
degrades and then we'll see what happens to their emotions. At what level are they going to just check out and not be happy, even though they've got all of the hormonal dial up switches and they're in this amazing virtual experience pretending to be James Bond or whatever. And then the reality of people actually just living a simple life, an honest, authentic, physical life will actually make them evidently more satisfied. I think that's a really, again, it's going to play out. We're going to see that, and I'll be fascinated to watch that happen.
Well, right. We're going to be up against all of these philosophical questions. I mean, that's the gist of it. I think that's why this blows people's minds, is because we're going to have to face all of these things, and it's going to happen relatively quickly. Like when it hits, it's going to hit, and it's going to all of a sudden it's going to be like, well, Like, what do we do? How do we handle this? And the one prediction I see consistently, and this has been how I've been thinking about it, which is that eventually I think we end up in a much better place. The question is, how long does it take? I think we can say with pretty good, confidence that our current governments will not handle this well initially. They won't. They
No,
won't
for
do this
sure.
well. I mean, they're not equipped. They suck at legislating as it is with shit they're used to. Like, they are not going to handle this well. They're either going to go way overboard and like, throw a basic income out there without thinking and like crash the damn markets and give everybody too much money, kind of a la COVID. Or, they're going to do nothing and we're going to have like massive, unemployment and rioting and civil unrest. Like, it's unlikely they're going to do this properly. That's the scary part. But I think given anywhere from 5 to 20 years, depending on how far off the rails we go, the other side of this is probably pretty great. The question is just how long does it take us to get there?
Yes. Wow. So look, this is another massive rabbit hole. We could do 3-hour conversations, no doubt, like Joe Rogan and these guys.
Uh,
There's so another interview that I just listened to. I think it was yesterday. Nicholas Anzinger, I think I'm getting
mm-hmm.
his right, was speaking to a elderly gentleman who's been in the regulation industry his whole life.
Mm,
And he's seen things like from whatever the 50s or something. And he seemed to kind of be content, but his description of the regulatory industry is that it's basically it's just a big mafia. It's
mhm.
literally, and they slow progress down, and all they do is find opportunities to extract rent
Yep.
from innovation, um, and then cover up to legitimize it. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
Martin Armstrong, the economist that I follow, he projects that 2032, the confidence in governments will have completely collapsed. Fiat currencies will have run their course. And when it will be like the end of the Roman Empire, it will be literally a brand new start. And
Yep.
so he's saying that we're going to have a choice based on what we do from now to then to prepare what comes next. But he says, no doubt we will have an opportunity for something new from about 2032. And interestingly, someone else has just said that the CCP, the Chinese, what is it? People's
Communist, whatever.
China, whatever. Um, they are collapsing from the inside. They're
Yep.
starting to have infighting, and they're starting to degrade control for various reasons. So again, it's like this is a global thing. It's very, very amazing time. And one last thing in the back of my mind is you mentioned life extent, or you didn't call it life extension, but we're going to have the opportunity to extend our lifespan
Hmm.
potentially very radically. I've been excited about that since I was 16 years
Hmm.
on reading some stuff. Other people are not going to be able to tolerate the concept of living 1,000 years because the first 60 years or 30 years sucked so much.
Right.
When you've had to grow up in this upside down civilization as we have it, um, it's difficult to broach the idea of living 10,000 years or a
Hmm.
1,000 years. So I think some people are just going to check out of the system. They're going to plug themselves in to MetaQuest version 5 or whatever it becomes, live in this fantasy world, degrade, not be able to look themselves in the mirror, and they're just going to check out. While this is the inequality gap. It's not going to be wealth. It's going to be who is able to psychologically brook the responsibility and the opportunity to learn. How fast you learn is going to be key.
Hmm.
How curious you are, how much grit you've got to make it over this hump, and how much trauma is left on the back of all of the horror that we've had to endure to be able to get to that point. Again, this is like part and parcel of this big social experiment that we're going to see people go through. Anyway,
Yeah, no. It's a whole thing, and there's a lot to it. Like you said, it's a very deep subject. And right now, I feel like we're just the ostrich, right? Heads are in the sand. I mean, we're really not talking about it if you think about it. We're talking about it very superficially, right? Of course, you see articles about this, but they all kind of say the same thing, like, oh no, AI is coming. What are we going to do? Like, we're not talking like think pieces and like people really breaking down scenarios like, hey, if this degrades, we're really looking at this. Like, I mean, some people are. I mean, it sounds like, you're reading somebody who's done that article I shared with you that we were talking about earlier. This guy definitely like gets into that somewhat. But it's and it's an unknown, but um one of the things that I'm most excited about is the possibility that I mean, it already exists now. It's very doable, but I see virtual nation states. Like I see nation states forming or something like them. I suppose we don't need to call them nation states, but virtual states forming where what people end up doing as traditional governments are degrading, collapsing, becoming, inefficient is realizing that the technology's there to form your own government, basically. You don't need to, put an army together and cause bloodshed. You just need a bunch of people who have a similar mindset, who are willing to agree to a set of terms and an operating governance system, like a DAO or whatever. I mean, you can do it any way you want. I happen to think the DAO type system and some variation of it's probably ideal for this. And go about designing, a society for yourself because we do have tools, for example, with DeFi to create our own decentralized insurance pools and basically anything you can think of that would be in a safety net,
mhm,
retirement funds, and so on, right? Like all of the stuff's here. And you can even get foreign relations going, like, and get recognized as a state. You might have to start off with some really obscure places, possibly even pay some governments to do it. But like, you could do this, folks. Like, this is legit, and end up like with a passport and everything. It's a big thing. Don't get me wrong. It's not something you're going to do in your basement, over a weekend. But if you have enough people, this is a very doable thing. It's something I've been working on for a long time, and I hope the opportunity presents itself to do it because I think it could be pretty spectacular.
well, let's get into that in another episode. We can talk about Prospera over in Honduras, which I'm very interested in visiting soon. And there's also Palau or Palau or something. It's like a little collection of islands that don't even like you can barely build buildings on it because they're so small islands. But it's a legal jurisdiction, and they're providing citizen residence and
Yep.
citizenship. Uh, so let's get into that topic in one other conversation.
Yeah. We need to do something on governance, right? We're kind
Yeah,
of in that field, so to speak, pretty heavily.
yeah,
I want to talk about it. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. I mean, something I can talk about that you and I have been working on is, we're going to try to get some guests here. We really, the whole idea here was to do this kind of first 30 days. I believe we're going to achieve that this week because we
yeah.
started August 30th, is what I recall. And so that means we are at day 26. So 4 more days. That'll be Thursday, or yeah, Thursday will be day 30. And from there, we're kind of take what we've learned and start seeing what we can do to really evolve this into a continuous show. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Fantastic. Audio podcast version coming up, thumbnails on videos, guests,
Yep.
uh, transcripts, newsletter,
Airdrops, um,
NFTs. Come on, let's put it.
NFTs, tokens, special invitations. I mean, basically, listen to the podcast. You're going to be rich, and this transition's going to be no guarantees, not financial advice.